Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Founder Hour podcast.
And this podcast is brought to you by Outer. Outer makes the world's most beautiful, comfortable, innovative, and high-quality outdoor furniture, all from sustainable materials, and is the only outdoor furniture with a patented built-in cover to make protecting it effortless. From teak chairs to fire pit tables, everything Outer makes has the look and feel of what you'd expect at a five-star resort for less than you'd pay at a big box store for something that won't last.
Pat, and you know how much I love five-star resorts.
Oh yeah, I do.
And as you know, Pat and I spend a lot of time outdoors, and we love hanging out on our outer couches. We're certain you'll love it too. For a limited time, get 10% off and free shipping at liveouter.com. This is Outer's best offer anywhere.
Anywhere.
Only available to the Founder Hour listeners. Get 10% off and free shipping at live, O-U-T-E-R. Let me say that again for all you alphabet geeks. Live, OUTER.com/the Founder Hour. That's liveouter.com/the Founder Hour. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's get into the episode.
Our guest today is Dave Finocchio. Dave is the co-founder and former CEO of Bleacher Report, a global digital media company delivering content at the intersection of sports and culture. He started the company with three of his childhood friends in 2005, and it went on to be acquired by TBS in 2012. Several years later, Dave stepped down from his role and most recently launched The Cool Down, which is a media platform that aims to be America's first mainstream climate brand. Please enjoy our conversation with Dave Finocchio.
This is how we like to start most of our podcasts, in a hotel room. We're in a, let's measure it, 65 square foot hotel room.
Yep.
Have you ever done a podcast in a hotel room, Dave?
I do all my podcasts in hotel rooms. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, we might have to change the name of our podcast to Founders in Hotels.
That's a good one. It's like the driving in cars with comedians show.
Yeah, this is about the same size as my freshman year college dorm room. It's like same.
Good memories. Memories. Well,
Not
thank
really,
you for
but-
having us in in your hotel room, I should say. We're excited to talk about your journey as a founder, and even before that. So we'd like to kick it off from the get-go with where you were born.
I was born in Mountain View, California. Before that was a famous place.
Before
At a hospital.
At a hospital,
It
yeah.
happens to be in Mountain View,
Got it.
California. Yeah.
What was going on in Mountain View at the time?
I think not a whole lot. I think probably had the garbage dump that later became Shoreline Amphitheater. I don't know. There's a music venue there. That's what Mountain View was known for when I was a kid. And then eventually Google rolled in and like kind of took over Mountain View, and that's
Cheap
what
land.
people know it for these days. But yeah,
Yeah.
concert venue, dump, Google.
What else? Like, what else was in the city? Like, Mountain View. I've been there once, but I can't remember. Like, is there a lot to do outside of,
So I grew up a little. I was born in Mountain View, but I grew up in a town, like another suburb of San Jose, California.
Yeah.
It's a good place to grow up.
Yeah, that's a good place. We know what that is.
Yeah. I was like, growing up in California is mostly pretty awesome. I was close enough to sort of the tech stuff that was going on at the time that, probably had a little bit more of an entrepreneurial, anything's possible mindset than maybe kids that grow up in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So
What
yeah.
did how did your parents end up there? Like, what did they do for a living?
My dad worked in tech, networking technologies. He
Like
worked for
actual tech.
Yeah, like real, like back when they built the stuff that makes it really easy for all of us now. He worked at a company called 3Com mostly.
Okay.
They did one of the first sports stadium deals. So when like Candlestick Park, which is where the 49ers and San Francisco Giants used to play, I think the first ever stadium deal in the United States, or one of the first, was it became 3Com Park. So yeah, sports connection there.
You're talking about like a title, like a right type of situation.
Yeah. When before,
naming rights,
like before
yeah.
naming rights before stadiums. They used to be called like
right, Wrigley
Yeah.
Field or
Wrigley was named
that's
after
right.
that was
a guy
yeah.
who started a gum company.
I had to.
Yeah.
That was my example of all the examples.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
we
there are others. There are others though.
Yeah.
Like Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh,
Right.
because there were three rivers there, not because Three Rivers paid them, $20 million a year.
Yeah.
So my dad was in tech. And they ended up there because of his job. My mom didn't go to college. Like moved to Europe when she was 18. Was a nurse in Europe for a long time. Then moved to South Africa for a long time. So I sort of had like one parent that sort of really valued travel and spoke different languages and had these different life experiences. And then my dad sort of had this business side. So it was a good, like, I really value sort of the, like, way I kind of got both sides of that.
Did you play sports growing up?
Yeah, I played every sport. I played 3 sports in high school before, like, I played everything. I became obsessed with
Football,
sports.
basketball, soccer. I mean,
I never
baseball.
played tackle football, but played a lot of flag football. But played basketball, played soccer, played baseball, played as a runner, played golf, tennis,
right?
Lots of other stuff too. I just
loved
it.
Were you into the stories? Like I have a kid cousin now. He's about 6, and he knows like this. He loves sports. He's not, he doesn't play as many, but he loves following the stats, the stories. I mean, were you that kid, or were you just more focused on playing the game?
I was totally that kid. My dad was a sports fan, but not a huge sports fan. But he was in a running group on weekends, and one of his good buddies was really into sports, and his buddy Woody basically taught me to read by reading. Like he first taught me to read baseball box scores, and then that was sort of my impetus as like a 4-year-old to like, I want to be able to read because I want to know what's going on. So I would get up with my dad at like 6 a.m. every morning to go get the San Jose Mercury News outside and read the sports section cover to cover. I probably did that every single morning from the time I was, 4 or 5 years old until I went to college. Like, so I was like, the central casting that kid.
Yeah. Well, what sport, I guess, was like your main sport that you would say that you were the best at?
That I was the best at?
Yeah.
I was good at a lot of sports. I was never great at anything. I think I made all league in high school at 3 different sports, but never like, I didn't play in college and anything. So I was a pretty good soccer player, pretty good at golf. I was a pretty good runner.
I feel like every guy who's into sports has that age where they realize, oh shit, I'm not going to make it to the pros. You think you are like at some point, and then you get to one where you're just like, oh, everyone's just like way better than I am. When was that age for you when you just kind of realized like this isn't going to be like my career when I grow up?
Man, I think I was a little bit more on the side of I was almost a little bit more of a late bloomer in sports, where I never thought I was going to play pro sports. It was more like I'm going to work really hard so that I can, be on the high school teams, and then did well enough in those. When I was in college, I played a ton of hoops and like turn myself into a pretty decent basketball player. So I more so like I just loved playing everything. Where it's like I was more the kid who like I could never focus on one sport, and maybe if I'd like played one sport, I could have been pretty good at it. But I just like I wanted to do everything.
Did the sports ever take away from your studies, or were you academically like a pretty good student as well?
I was a really good student in the subjects that I was interested in, and then I would do like the bare minimum to get by in other subjects, and I would I would get A's and B's, and I'd get A's in the subjects that I cared about, and then I'd get B pluses in the other ones. But I never I always cared more about sports than I did about my schoolwork, and I would have always prioritized that. Right.
I feel like most boys, I don't want to say all boys, but most boys growing up, like that's kind of it. Like you have, it's either, well, nowadays maybe it's a little different. It's just like video games and maybe sports. But back then, like Pat and I still grew up in a time where we didn't have a smartphone, and like the laptop was like kind of around, but it was like 10 pounds. And so you were outside playing sports. Like that was a part of your like life. It was school, sports, eating, sleep. Like that's kind of it.
Yeah, totally. And as you said, with like some video games mixed in.
Yeah, mixed in.
But they're it's so different now for kids where they have so many more options of what to do with their time, and that's why sports are a lot less popular now, playing sports and watching sports for younger generations than they were when we were growing up.
Yeah.
For I think primarily for that reason, because there's just so many other things to get into.
Do you think that, I mean, and we're jumping around here, but like, do you think that like that's going to cause any problems like long term? Like, and I talk about that from, mentally, physically, as, being in a team type setting, adversity, things of that nature. Like those are all the things that sports really kind of teach you beyond just having fun, getting a nice sweat and a workout in. But like, how do you think that plays out long term?
I mean, for me personally, and for a lot of the people that I've most enjoyed working with, and the people that have been like most successful in the companies I've worked with, have had real sports backgrounds. And you touched on it. You learn a work ethic. You learn how to overcome adversity. I think one of the things that people don't, when they have this conversation, they don't always get to is, I think you learn how to play different roles on a team. Like I was on teams where I was the best player. I was on teams where I was the second best player. I was on teams where I was, just like another guy. I was on teams where I was a bench warmer.
Right.
And whatever, sports puts you in positions where you have to be a team player and learn your role. And I think in life, that's really important. Like sometimes you just need to know how to fit in and do your part, versus some people who haven't been on teams, like they always sort of insist on, I need to be the star, or I see myself as this type of person. And maybe sometimes you are, but maybe sometimes that's not what's needed. Like in a company environment, like you're not the star. We need you to do this. So yeah, I think for most people, that's a great learning. So I'm very pro kids having some exposure to,
because you talk about like the sort of not the contrast, but like learning in school and then being more interested in sports, but the amount of lessons you probably learned that you picked up, like just life, lessons, people, lessons in terms of dealing with people and being in work environments, probably has gone a longer way than like what you were learning in class, right? And so like
totally,
and like to your point, you have your role, but then you're also like part of this larger team, and sometimes you have to, step out of your role and like help someone here or help someone there, and I think that those lessons are just super valuable. So I hope it doesn't go away. I mean, yeah.
And Dave, I like that point about the team because I hadn't thought about it in that respect. But now I think about some of the teams that I've worked with and some of the people that have led those teams, and I'm trying to go through it, and I'm not going to name names, but they definitely had never played sports, and so like perhaps maybe even team sports. Maybe they played like golf, tennis, which I love both of those sports, but they've never been in a team setting where they're losing or where they're needed or where they maybe weren't needed, right? Like that's a pretty like interesting perspective. And it's funny, like our company, most of the people that we hire have played some sort of sport, and it just kind of so happens that way. But
I think
perhaps something interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that sports are the only way in like you can be on other teams that are not sports teams. I think one of the something that I valued a lot, like going to college and being in being with like mostly I went to Notre Dame, like we were in dorms that were single sex. So I was in a dorm with like a bunch of guys, and like just like having a leadership role sort of like in a group of friends. I think that can also teach you a bunch of lessons about like just fundamentally learning how to lead people. You're not always the leader, but like when you are in a leadership position, regardless if it's sports or something else, I think you learn a ton from that. And if you can lead people in one setting, usually that translates to other settings as well.
What does that look like? I mean, in a group of friends, like if you're not in like a organized environment where it's like a work setting or like a sports setting, like how was that experience?
I think it's like if you're, I went to college in a like South Bend, Indiana. It was a cold place. Like there's not a lot to do.
I figured the first thing you're going to say was that it was a cold place.
It's I mean, if you're going to talk about that place, like one of the first few things you got to say about it is it's pretty cold.
Pretty damn cold.
There's not that much to do. Yeah. So it's a sort of place where you have to make your own fun. And I came from California. I was used to having a lot of fun, and I was like, all right, we're gonna have to build a special culture here, like amongst my buddies of like we're gonna have to start traditions. We're gonna have to throw great parties. We're gonna have to all the things that we did, and I actually learned a lot from that of those 4 years of being being in a situation where like it wasn't always easy to, as easy to go to a great party as it was where I grew up or this. And, and it's like we kind of made it happen. We made it a great 4 years. And yeah, I learned as much from that as I probably did from school. I learned some things in school too, but it's like those experiences, learning how to interact with other humans and like coming together to build a culture that's a really special culture that like everybody, it becomes, one of the most important things in your life then, and even carrying forward for, a lot of the people, it's still something that is, one of the more important things in their life.
Yeah.
So speaking of college, I mean, what was the plan for you? I mean, you go to college and then, I mean, what did you study?
I studied economics and history.
Fun.
It was, so I'm a history junkie. The other, like, sports and history are my two passions in life. They're pretty 50-50.
How did you figure out the history part, like in terms of your passion for it?
Oh my gosh. From the time I was, probably dates a little bit to my mom and my parents and travel and sort of just like having a little bit more of a worldly view of things. I also just love storytelling. Like I love great stories. I love film and television and books and like I'm just like a voracious consumer of stories. But history, I think, is like for me, it's the single best. It's like an endless source of incredible stories that continue to blow my mind. So I'm pretty much always reading.
Was it just general history, or was it like U.S. history or world history?
I've gone through phases on everything. Like right now, I'm reading a book about I'm reading a book about our Indo-European ancestors that lived in the Pontic steppe in like 6,000 years ago and ended up splitting into different groups. And the Greeks that fought in the Trojan War, they came from there, and the Celts and anyway, I could go on and on.
Okay, I have a question actually. How much generally speaking, how much of history do you think directly impacts the future? Like if you're a really good, like if you're a history junkie, you know a lot about history. Do you feel like you're somebody that I don't want to say like you could read the future, but like you can apply a lot of the things that you're learning in seeing how the world is unfolding?
I think there's a ton of pattern recognition for sure. Like right now I'm doing a climate company, and one of the reasons I got so passionate about doing it is not to jump too far ahead, but I did a lot of reading on societal collapses and sort of like what the circumstances were that, where there were like pretty strong cracks that emerged in different civilizations. And then when something really bad would happen, and bad things always happen, there wasn't enough sort of buffer in the society to handle it. And like, that's usually when collapse happens. So to answer your question, I wish one of my pain points in life is like, I just wish more people would be interested in things that happened in the past, so we don't have to make the same damn mistakes over and over again. So that is a little bit of my perspective on life. Yeah.
And I feel like the way that happens is if content creators get creative enough and can put it in a digestible format. And yes, of course, like there's not a substitute perhaps for reading a book or being there in that moment.
100%.
But there are ways to package it that will at least get people interested, and then you could do a deeper dive if this is something that actually like, sparks some sort of interest in you. And then you could go read a book, go interview somebody, go listen to a podcast. I mean, there's no shortage of content. You just have to like find it. But I do think that, and I'm not a history junkie. I mean, obviously you've studied history and whatnot, but I feel like I don't spend enough time and invest time.
When it comes to education,
it's a lot of time.
When it comes to like the intersection of that and like technology, I feel like AR and VR is probably going to be a big, like immersive content is going to be a big like catalyst for getting that ball rolling in terms of like being
like
more
taking
engaged.
You back to the Aztecs.
Yeah, exactly. Like being there and experiencing it versus just reading it out of a book, right?
Yeah. So I haven't put this out yet, but I actually recorded a podcast last week with a friend of mine named Daniele Bilelli. He's a history professor who has one of the biggest history podcasts in the world. It's called History on Fire, and he has a podcast series called The Conquest of Mexico, which is like, it is so good. It's some of the best storytelling of any medium I've ever like consumed in my life. It was so good that in the third episode, I was listening to it in the car. I had to pull my car over to the side of the road. So I could not believe what was going on. I could not handle driving a car and listening to this at the same time. It was mind blowing stuff. And so to me, it comes down to like you're 100% right. It's all about packaging. Like if something's just audio, it's going to be limiting compared to if it's like they made a $300 million movie out of it. But I think it all comes down to storytellers. Like if you have the
100%.
right person, the right talented person telling the story, that's everything. So I like, I get into storytellers and I try to consume everything that
Yeah.
those people do.
Who are some of your favorites like growing up, or like what were your favorite stories? I'm not talking about like out of a history book or anything, but content like movies or shows or things like that.
Oh man. I was like a Star Wars junkie as a kid and stuff. I would
Love Star Wars.
Dazed and Confused, I think, was one of the more influential movies in my life. I saw that movie when I was 12 or something, and it was like, yep, I'm gonna check some of this stuff out. I just like I love movies that sort of like transport you to a time and a place. I don't know, man. I've watched every movie and every show. My wife and I are show junkies.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, since we're now on this history topic, how much of history do you think is embellished, or how much of the stories of history do you think are embellished? Like, if you had to put like a percentage on it.
Boy, that I think is tough. I think that there are great historians out there that try as best as possible to take the information that they have and to sort of split the middle on what probably happened. But it's all, the reality is like unless you were there, like
Right.
the depiction of what happened is probably different or pretty different than what actually happened.
Totally. My number was 12%.
Your number is 12%.
So 88% accuracy. That's pretty damn good.
We'll go with that.
At USC, that's like an A++ in your business classes, like just with that curve. It's pretty
Our
crazy.
curve in most classes was like 60%.
Yeah. So
That must have been nice.
So Notre Dame, you're doing well. You're doing great. Obviously, you're having a good time. You're warming up. What comes next?
Well, sort of the Bleacher Report story started there. I did some internships when I was in college, like a lot of kids do who are relatively privileged. And I spent a summer doing sales. I spent a summer working for a venture capital firm in Palo Alto. Spent a summer working for an iBank in New York, and I took a job with the iBank. I was offered a job, accepted it verbally. And a little bit after doing that, I had sort of like an early midlife crisis. I'm sort of a contrarian by nature, not so much in terms of like I don't like conforming to like whatever the popular thing is. I don't act out in terms of like dressing differently, or like there are different ways that people sort of handle that, but I tend to run in the opposite direction of like what everybody is doing just by nature. And
Is it because that everyone's doing it? Like, is it because
I think
yeah.
some of it is that where I just like I want to like I just have this like internal thing where I want to feel like an individual. And I'm like
That's a crazy thought. Like, I mean,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
but
I understand what you're saying. It's like this feeling of if everyone is on this side, it's almost like zigging when everyone's zagging type of thing, right? Like there must be something else.
It's like I have a hard, like if a song is too popular and like everybody's doing it, or there's some trend that everybody's doing, I'm just like, it's not cool. Everybody's doing it. That's just sort of how I'm wired. And I sort of felt that way about the career path I was maybe choosing to go down, of like I'm just going to be like, I had some exposure to people who worked, doing hardcore finance, and like a lot of them didn't have great personal lives. They were getting divorces, like they're not spending much time with kids. I was like, that's not what I want my life to be like. And also on top of that, like if I go and work for a big financial firm or something, like I'm just sort of a cog in the wheel. Like I want to do something more with my life. And so I freaked out. I decided I wasn't going to do that job.
And how old are you at this time? Like 21?
I was 21.
Yeah.
And that was probably like about the end of my first semester of my senior year of college, maybe the beginning of the second semester. And it was so cold that winter. I was spending so much time just consuming online sports content. I was like,
Was it like what, ESPN at the time? I mean, what else was there?
Yeah, ESPN was definitely
Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, ESPN's definitely the main staple.
Yeah.
I mean, online newspapers barely at all.
Was a real GM a thing back then?
I
Not
don't
even?
I don't know.
Not.
It might have been, or it might have been around, but probably wasn't on my radar.
Yeah.
But I basically like had a couple observations about like that were stuck in my head about the online sports world. One was that I thought existing content was really out of touch with my generation. It just was like the way I was on a college campus, spending a lot of time with buddies, and just the way we talked about sports in our lives was just not being reflected online, where you had these like very wordy articles written by mostly dudes in their 50s and 60s. It was just really...
It was designed for like the newspaper reader.
It was designed for the newspaper reader. It was very game recappy. The things we cared about, like a lot of the sports culture that you sort of see today that's represented visually on Instagram, or like even lists and rankings, like content that was more fun to discuss. Like sports topics, I think sports are almost like a universal language for a lot of guys who love sports. It's like, it's the way you connect with each other. Oftentimes conversations will start with, talking about Michael Jordan versus Kobe Bryant, and there just wasn't enough stuff like that. So that was one observation. And the other was, I was an economics major. So I was like thinking about supply and demand all the time because I'm taking all these courses. And I thought, geez, it really seems like there isn't a whole lot of data used to figure out how much, like what content to create. It seems like there's certain topics that maybe people don't care that much about anymore. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game is like the classic example of like every outlet in the country was still sending somebody to that game. It was a big deal in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, but by the time you were getting there, nobody cared anymore. And yet there were all sorts of other sports topics like the NFL draft, like transactional events, certain teams that seemed to be really undercovered. So yeah, it was I just got really passionate about like, I want to make something for my generation, but also I think there's sort of a legitimate economic argument about what you could do here.
Were these thoughts that you were voicing also to those around you, or this was just like internal conversation?
Most of that I would say for like my second semester, my senior year of college, I probably talked to my girlfriend about it. But it seemed a little ridiculous to be like, hey, I'm going to go start a sports website. I think even when I decided to do that, I think a lot of my friends, definitely my family, were like, okay.
But in this period of like soul searching, right? Like you had this existential crisis, right? And you're like, I don't want to go down this high finance route. What was your approach to eventually like leading up to, figuring out what you wanted to do with Bleacher Report and starting that? Like, was it like, I'm going to sit down and I want to start a business and I need to come up with an idea, and like you were kind of just like pushing that? Or did it just somehow come to you that, hey, there needs to be like this platform for sports lovers? Yeah.
Definitely more the latter. It was a total passion play. It was more about I want to create something that matters. And I grew up in Silicon Valley. I was like, let's do it as a business. But I was definitely not thinking about it from the standpoint of like, I don't want to take this job. So like, I want to come up with a business idea because I want to start a business. It started with, I want to do something in sports.
Yeah. And did you think that was going to be your full-time job?
It wasn't my full-time job so I graduated. I sent a PowerPoint presentation out to my buddies that were really smart and sort of had their acts together. The combination of those two things, within the first 2 months, a couple of my good friends from high school said, yeah, I'll do this with you. And we started working on it. But I ended up taking a finance job in Chicago to pay the bills, for over a year and a half. And we did Bleacher Report part-time. Yeah.
Was it called Bleacher Report?
Yeah, it was always called Bleacher Report.
Yeah. And I think I saw that you had 3 co-founders, right? And you guys were all friends from high school?
Yeah, the 4 of us started going to school together in 7th grade. And yeah, we were part of the same group of, there were 12 of us in high school that were super close friends.
Were there other, like, were you trying to find friends that could kind of fill certain roles early on? Or like, how did like whoever said yes, like I'm down and like work on this with you, did you just say, okay, let's do it?
It was probably a little bit between those two, but definitely some of just like, hey, I want to do this. Who wants to do it with me? And then two of my friends, Brian and Dave, just took it more seriously, and that we like that was the group that really said, hey, this can be a company. And we started turning it into a company.
And what were
versus a
Brian and
project.
Dave doing at the time?
Dave went to USC, and he was a film major.
It's great school. Film school.
No comment from Dave.
Yeah. And he had a show. He had a show on the HD network at the time that was like, he got a couple episodes aired. So like Dave was kind of doing real shit. And then Brian had a job working in consulting at Deloitte, just doing, and now Brian lives like a Playboy life in Miami. It's a like very, very different life these days for him. And I'm married with 2 kids. Like our lives could not be any more different. But yeah, we all just like grind. Dave was in LA. Brian was traveling all over the place. I lived in Chicago. We got a website up, started creating content.
Were you guys all good writers, or just like?
We're all decent writers. We did a lot of early writing ourselves, but we figured out pretty quickly that if we were like, the model wasn't going to scale if we did the writing, so or most of the writing, and essentially like we had a meeting in the Bay Area over like Labor Day of 2006. And we all basically put our hands in the middle and we're like, all right, we are all agreeing we're quitting our jobs in March of 2007. We're going to do this full time. And we all committed to like, we're going to put a certain amount of money. I think we each like put like $30,000 into a bank account, which, you know, I think we knew that was coming, had been saving up for it. And,
what needed to happen for you to make that decision? Like a year in, was it just, were you seeing obviously a lot of traffic? Not really.
You know, it was definitely more of just like a screw it, like I want to do this thing.
We enjoy it. I mean, there must be like a market for it. Like we're just gonna give it all. There
was no really logical reason to do it, other from a metric standpoint or anything, other than just like we want to go try to do this. Like we want to be entrepreneurs. We want to. We'd rather be doing this versus Dave getting our Emmanuel coffee and, you know, me working till 3 a.m. in Chicago and whatever the hell Brian was doing.
Yeah.
It was more of like a lifestyle. Like we want to go try to do this.
I want to kind of talk about like the state of the internet at this time, because I think that plays a big role in terms of like the timing of when you guys started this thing, right? Like 2005, 6. I'm just trying to think, you know, MySpace, AIM, maybe, like when it comes to social, and then outside of that, like what was the state of the internet, and what how did you get this website up and running?
AIM had been huge for years at that point, but that was like, I would say that had been the primary sort of like like on desktop, right? So it's not on phones.
Right.
Texting is not a thing yet at all. There are no mobile apps. Those don't come until 2010, 2011. MySpace is a thing. Facebook has started to take over for MySpace. Facebook,
colleges mostly.
2004 was like the big year where Facebook and colleges. I don't know what year Facebook went broad, but it was probably around that time
06
frame.
maybe.
Yeah, I would say that too. Maybe 06. And YouTube is around, but you know, you can't like. The quality's not particularly good.
So there wasn't as much.
Today.
There wasn't as much opportunity to share content online, basically, like at that time.
I mean, totally different. Like the world that we live in today was starting to be built out, but like very much in its nascency. I mean, when we're talking about Facebook, like newsfeed's not even around. Like Facebook is go to a girl's profile and check out her pictures, or vice versa.
And then put it on your like top 8.
That was MySpace.
Oh, that was MySpace.
That was MySpace.
But we had bulletin boards on MySpace.
Gotcha.
If you guys remember that. But yeah. So did you know how to code a website? Like, we
did not know how to code a website. We hire, we decided actually, Dave Nemitz, one of my co-founders, I remember leading this decision, like really pushed to build the website using Ruby on Rails. It was sort of, without going deep on the tech, it was sort of novel at the time. We ended up being one of the biggest Ruby on Rails sites on the planet, which was cool. We ended up finding an 18-year-old kid His name's Quinn Slack. He now runs a company, I think, that's worth billions of dollars. Who knows? Brilliant kid. Like 1,600 on his SATs. Had like deferred a year from going to Stanford and like wanted real life work experience. So yeah, we brought Quinn in, and poor Quinn had to sit with us in an office for months. And yeah, he was our first developer. And then we basically got like the basic version of a site off the ground and brought in another developer. And then we're able to raise our first round, which was like $1.5 million round, which at the time was a Series A.
And were you guys paying yourselves or not really?
No, I think what I remember in the beginning is that we were gonna pay ourselves like either $400 or $800 a month, just as like a living stipend. And I think after 1 month, we're like, we can't afford to do that. So we rented a 300 square foot windowless, air conditioningless office in Menlo Park, California. I think the office was like $600 a month, and we worked 7 days a week until we raised that round.
This episode is brought to you by More Than Profit. If you enjoy the Founder Hour, we think you'll enjoy this podcast too. It celebrates entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders that are living and working with purpose. The host, Bryce Butler, sits down with his guests and shares personal stories about what it's like to succeed and even fail. But more than that, what motivates them beyond just profit to press forward in their work and as a leader. Check out More Than Profit wherever you get your podcasts or at www.morethanprofit.fm. All right, let's get back into the episode.
And were you guys like watching sports and covering it yourselves, or how are you guys getting the content?
Mostly what we did was we recruited writers. There were at the time, the other thing that was going on the internet at the time was blogging was really popular.
Right.
That was the other dynamic.
Blogspot.
Yep. Tumblr. Yep. WordPress.
And Tumblr was a little later, but WordPress, Blogspot for sure. And there were a lot of sports blogs that emerged. And what was happening was that guys would do them, but they couldn't make any money, and they would burn out after a pretty like 1 or 2 years, and they'd mostly be done. So we said, hey, we'll recruit these people. We'll recruit people who wrote for their college newspapers about sports, and we'll basically we'll give them a platform where they'll have more support, where they won't have to find the audience themselves, and we'll help them reach a larger audience than they ever could on their own. And we sort of like gamified sports writing in the early years. You would start as a junior analyst or something, and then the more readers you got, the more comments were on your articles, the more this or that. You sort of moved up in status. I was a big Halo player in college, if you guys remember that video game.
Yep.
And I basically ripped off their leveling and sort of like rewards system.
Interesting.
That was my inspiration for Bleacher Report's early product. Worked great.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Something I read that was really interesting was that speaking of like having data kind of dictate what you were doing, was like I saw that you would use like Google Insights to find like what people were searching for in terms of sports.
Yeah.
What were people searching for? Like, what did you see where you're like, oh, interesting, like we should write about this or that?
All right, let me think if I can say this correctly. It's been a long time. So what we figured out was that like I was creating a lot of content and working with writers creating a lot of content. It became very clear that articles about the NFL outperformed articles about Major League Baseball pretty much 100% of the time. So you realize like, okay, not all sports topics are created equal. And some of the stuff would be obvious, like Yankees content's probably going to do better than like Milwaukee Brewers content. No shit. But you started to be able to map that stuff out and say, okay, we should be probably creating more content about the NFL draft because these articles do really well, yada, yada. But then like there were sort of two conjoining factors. One, you'd create content, you'd go look at how that content performed in Google Analytics, and you would be able to see, okay, for this article about the NFL draft, here are the top 2 or 3 search terms that people looked for that ended up ended up with them on our website. So maybe one was like NFL draft order or whatever it would be. But then you could go plug that term back into Google Insights, and you'd say like, oh, we published this article about NFL draft order on January 6th where there was, X amount of interest. But if we'd actually published it on January 3rd where there was the most interest, then we would have gotten way more traffic. So we had this feedback loop where we were able to create content to discover the terms that people were coming to us with, and then to plug those terms back into Google Insights to say like, the next time we do this, how do we optimize so that we get as much audience as possible out of those terms? So you can't do anything like that anymore, but because of privacy rules. But that was a very, very effective strategy. We were able to map out for every sport, anything you can imagine. We were able to basically map out when there was the most interest about the particular topic.
And speaking of roles on a team, what was your role at the time? And I mean, I'm sure it's changed multiple times, but what were you doing early on?
I was in the early years. I was in charge of I was in charge of all the content. Was in charge of the sort of product vision and strategy and audience growth. So the way we sort of divided things up, I was sort of on the consumer facing side of the business, and then my two co-founders, one of them ran business development, and the other one worked sort of on like this, getting the sales side of the business off the ground.
As friends, how were you guys able to work out just working together and managing one another, holding each other accountable?
We definitely struggled with that. I think it's hard. We all knew each other so well that when things went bad, they're sort of like if you have a professional relationship with someone first, there are always lines that usually for most rational people that sort of don't get crossed. With our group of friends, like there were no lines in place. Like we knew each other too well. Definitely had incidents where, like the story I've told before, without naming who exactly did what. I wasn't there for it, but there was a day where two of my co-founders got into an argument in the office. Thankfully, the company was really small and nobody else saw it. But one of them slugged the other one in the face because, it's like we were friends, and sometimes that happened. The next day, that the guy who got slugged in the face called a meeting with the two of us who were not there, who were not participants in it. And one of the guys that he basically said, "Hey, such and such slugged me in the face. Like, you guys have got to fire him. Like, this is like," and my other co-founder said, "Oh, like you're making too big of a deal about this. Just like get over yourself." So then he slugged him in the face. So like, it was like we had.
That's one way to get boxing content. I guess.
Yeah, we definitely like. I think didn't. Thankfully, employees were not exposed to it very much, and it turned into a pretty professional organization over time. But it was definitely, Wild West craziness, and some stuff happened for sure.
Did you feel like at the time that, you talked about how sports were obviously a big part of your life. You played them, you watched them, you loved it. Did you feel like that passion was still there while you were building this company, or was it more like business and that's all you had time for?
I never lost my passion for sports. So I still have it. I think I'll have it until I die. The thing that was unexpected is I got really into, sort of the digital media game, and that like I kind of got obsessed with it. And that was something I could never predicted, where I was, in college being like, I want to start a sports website. I ended up, sort of like inventing a number of audience growth techniques that ended up, being sort of widely used in the industry. And I loved growth. Like just, I love like there's nothing, we would send out an email in the company every time we hit a new number of million uniques a month. So it was like, you start at like, we've hit 1 million uniques.
Yeah.
And I would send out like, some sports figure who was like, wore the number 1. So it's like, this was Kenny Lofton Day or whoever wore number 1. And we ended up getting all the way up to 81 million. So it's like, but that
Wow.
really drove just on web. Like when we were big on social, the numbers got way bigger than that. But
and I feel like you guys like really were on the cusp of like a lot of these like newer kind of trends or I don't want to call them trends, but it was like distribution channels. Like I think I saw, so you guys didn't like operate like every other sort of media website at that time where you guys had like a lot of newsletters. So you had that, like a different type of relationship with your end customer. And then when like social media came around, right? And like, I think from what I remember, like you guys were definitely like there early. And how did you, I guess, how did you see what was coming at the time and stay relevant with the younger audience that you were originally trying to, cater to?
We we built like the key to Bleacher Report success was we were really good at building on top of sort of other successes. So we built a big web audience, mostly off the back of Google to begin with, and we leveraged that to create we had a huge newsletter program before anybody else. We were too early in the newsletter game. Like we had like 3 or 4 million newsletter subs by 2010 or 2011.
Just a monopoly on inboxes.
We did really well with newsletters, but then mobile apps came along, and we're like, this is basically just a better version of a newsletter. We can allow people, instead of having to subscribe to 4 or 5 different team newsletters, they can just subscribe, like personalize their app, and which was a really novel concept at the time. And we're like, and shit, we can send people push notifications, and the push notifications were super, super key because we got really good. You talked about a younger audience. We had this core philosophy that we wanted our voice to be very peer-to-peer. We wanted to target a 20 to 25-year-old male consumer and talk to that person like we were their friend, or like we were their cool friend. So instead of hiring just exclusively sort of like journalism majors from USC or whatever, lame school, or like no, I'm just kidding.
UCLA, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. We really focused on hiring kids that had cool voices and who were sort of like participants in the culture we were trying to represent. And they were really, really talented at packaging sports news in a way where you'd want to share it with your friends and start a conversation. Yeah. So we had all these reps doing that in a mobile app. And then when Facebook and then Twitter and then later Instagram said like, all right, we're really going to start pushing third-party content because that's how we increase our time on site, we were just so much better positioned to know how to program content than our competitors were, I think, because of all our experience sending push notifications.
I'm curious, what was the revenue model originally and how did it change over time? Like in terms of,
It was, Bleacher Report was always mostly different forms of advertising. The types of advertising evolved over time. In the beginning, it was, mostly display ads on a website. By the time I left, I think the year I left, Bleacher Report did about $75 million in revenue just off Instagram. So it was like we ended up, selling massive sponsorships, massive branded content campaigns. A lot less of it with like the website ads were usually like tied to just, it was sort of like media that was attached to just increased scale for the campaigns. Commerce grew quite a bit in like the later years, but that was sort of the tail. I left in 2019. I think commerce was like 2016 and on sort of thing. But it was, when I left, it was almost a $200 million a year, mostly ad business. So ads aren't, it's a tough business. But if you become sort of a must buy, if you're influential enough, we were a must buy in the men's 18 to 34 category. I bought House of Highlights really early in its development, where it had a couple 100,000 followers. So that made us a must buy as well. So
you guys bought them? Is that what you said?
Yeah, bought it when I think we started talking to Omar when it had 200,000 or 300,000 followers, and we bought it at, I don't know.
What did you see that they just had a good pulse on? Like, was it basketball content mostly, or?
It was at the time he was posting highlights of a lot of different sports. A guy who now runs House of Highlights named Doug Bernstein found it and started talking to Omar. Doug was an early analytics guy at Bleacher Report, and he showed it to me, and he's like, this kid has a special voice. Like, just the way, like, it's just different. The way he's connecting with fans, it's just the best voice I've ever seen. And like Snoop was following him and would sometimes comment. And there was just the special thing about House of Highlights was that just like thousands of different celebrities were participating in its community. And so we saw the early signs of that happening. We're just like, this is different. And it worked out.
At what point in Bleacher Report's like journey did you personally start realizing, wow, like this could be like pretty lucrative? Like, I'm glad I pursued this path of entrepreneurship versus, taking on another job in finance or whatever other business you might have been in.
So we had the best way to answer that question is to say, like, it became a real company in 2007. We did pretty well in 2007 and 2008, and then 2009 was a disaster. Our investors kind of sort of forced a CEO on us when we had to raise money during the 2008 recession. We had 4 term sheets that were coming from different VCs. 3 of them got pulled, and one of them lowered their valuation. So we basically we re-upped with our Series A, which would really now be seed investors, and the condition was that we had to bring in this CEO guy, and just was not a good fit at all, at all. And what came out of it was that the 3 of us, Dave, Brian, and I, ended up really for the first time sort of realizing that we had to trust each other, and we ended up getting rid of the CEO, but we also divvied up responsibilities in a way where we just hadn't quite. We were all in each other's shit a little bit too much, and it was just okay, I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for that, you're responsible for that, and that was when we went from an audience of 3 million people, and we'd be we were stuck at 3 for a long time, for a year. We went from 3 to 10 in from October 2009 to June of 2010,
just because of that focus. And
we focused, we figured things out, we empowered people, and we just put all of our energy into growth versus our energy into fighting against the CEO or fighting with each other. And when that happened, our newsletter subscribers started growing really quickly. It was in that phase our newsletters were so well received by the audience we were reaching. I knew at that point that we probably had something. But I went from in 2009. I bought GMAT books. I was this isn't going to work. I'm studying to go to business school.
Really?
I was definitely. In fact, Brian and I made the decision that we were going to get rid of the CEO because I came to him and I was like, dude, this is awful. This is not going to work. This guy sucks. He has our investors' backs. And Brian and I sat down in an alley in San Francisco, and he basically said, screw that. We've worked on this for 3 or 4 years. Let's go to them. Let's get rid of this guy. Let's start trusting each other. And anyway, that was a very significant moment in the history of the company. So I'd say it went from I think this is screwed to I think this is going to work within probably 6 months.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you guys end up selling the company. How did that decision come about?
I think we were all pretty tired. We've been doing it. It doesn't sound like that long, but at the time it was 7.5 years.
This is 2012 now, right?
Sold in 2012. None of us had any money. We felt without in the sports world, rights are a big deal. Meaning meaning the rights to sports highlights, the rights to
intellectual property.
Yeah, I was going to ask how early on how are you getting these licensing? Was it licensing at that point?
We didn't have anything before we were acquired. Nothing.
Nothing.
So it was we felt without rights, the most the business would ever be worth was what HuffPost sold for, which is about $300 million.
Yeah.
So we're okay, we think that's the cap for right or wrong. And we got an offer for 215 from Turner and Time Warner, and we said, you know what, we could be greedy here and try
Close
to push
enough.
this,
Yeah.
but close enough. It was capital gains tax was going up, and we're oh, this is
close that deal.
So that was the financial part of it. And
Tax brackets and shit.
all the tax brackets. You got
I'll pay taxes. It's okay.
But the other part of it, the other part of it was that the other we talked to ESPN a couple times and talked to other people in the space. They kind of wanted to make Bleacher Report the JV to their varsity, to ESPN.com, the varsity. And Turner wanted to make Bleacher Report big. And I wasn't sure if they were actually, sort of blowing smoke up our ass, if they were actually going to follow through. But they said all the right things. They're like, we're going to invest in you, and we're going to do this together. And I really like the other people on the side of the table. So that was also like, I really felt confident that the best home for Bleacher Report was with Turner, which I think definitely ended up being the case.
And the idea would be they acquire you, fully acquire you, and you guys together as a team would still run the business.
Yeah, I stayed. The other two founders blew out at that point. The business had sort of evolved, and we brought a lot of other people in. But I think Turner initially planned that they would integrate us more, but we ended up like, we were just crushing it. So they ended up like, we'll leave them alone for a year. And it's like, we'll leave them alone for another year. They didn't really integrate Bleacher Report into the rest of the Turner business until after I left. We ran as a pretty autonomous. We were able to leverage things that we became the official sports partner of CNN, and we would do appearances on Inside the NBA and stuff. But we were able to run our own business. It was a pretty great experience.
Were you able to still keep that voice that really made Bleacher Report unique? Because I mean, like at the end of the day, like you're covering sports, but it's the storytelling aspect that made it or makes it what it is, right? Like, or was that kind of forced to change as Turner kind of came into the picture?
No, I don't. I think they were very. My partner on the other side was a guy named Matt Hong, who had just like, he deserves a ton of credit for whenever your company gets acquired, you've got to have somebody on the other side who has your back and has a shared vision with you. And Matt just had my back throughout. And whenever there were sticky things that came up where somebody who was really senior disagreed or wanted to do something else with us, like he just always had my back. So we worked through that stuff together. And no, there was one time where we had a journalist write an article about how NBA players use burner phones. Like it was like the culture of how NBA players cheated on their significant others. Yeah. And it was an awesome piece. Like it was one of the best pieces we've ever done. But there was a partnership with the NBA in place, and so I sent it to my boss's boss and said, hey, this is coming down the pipe. And it was the one time they said that he said, you can't publish this, where I decided to not publish it. There were a couple other times where I was told to not publish stuff and I did it anyway and took the consequences. But maybe only happened 3 times.
Yeah. I saw you left and came back once. What happened there?
Oh, I left. So I had my contract when we were acquired, and sort of like my bonus stuff ran through 2014. So I stayed then. Then our CTO and I bounced out and started another company. Stayed on great. I transitioned while I was doing that other company into sort of like an exec chairman of Bleacher Report role. And what happened was that they decided, Turner did, that Bleacher Report had a pretty big growth opportunity, and so they bought that company that we worked on for a year to bring me back, and they put $100 million into Bleacher Report. So I came back to oversee a big expansion plan. When I left, I told them, hey, I love this. It's been a great experience. But to keep doing this, like I want to be able to play bigger. Because like we just can't do that much from here unless you really invest in the business. But if you ever decide to invest in the business,
I was like probably strategic.
We can always talk about this. So I came back. I was there for another 3.5 years. We more than doubled revenue. The brand and the audience grew exponentially. It was cool. It worked.
And then ultimately, you said 2019 was when you fully stepped down.
Yeah, I stayed through. I helped them get through their integration with AT&T, because AT&T acquired Time Warner.
That's right.
And I kind of knew at that point that things weren't going to be the same. And I felt like I got my job done there, and I had some other interests that I wanted to pursue. Like I was starting to get really into climate, and I wanted to spend more time looking at that space, and knew I needed sort of a new purpose. So it was just the right time.
Did you feel as though after, or when you had made that decision in 2019, that you were financially secure enough to kind of go out and pursue something else, or was it again to build a successful company where there could be a financial, or a massive financial upside similar to Bleacher Report?
I would say I have never done anything. I've been really lucky and have made plenty of money. I haven't been. It's not like I'm not motivated by money, but I definitely have been more of a passion first person. So yeah, I mean, was lucky enough to be financially secure, and I wanted to go spend some time thinking about problems that weren't sports problems. I did that for a long time, and it was great. But I wanted to
you
do
just
some
want
other
to
stuff.
watch and enjoy sports, maybe playing with your kids, and that's about it.
It's funny. I enjoyed sports throughout. I just when it's your job to grow a sports audience every single month over and over and over again. And the other thing that I got a little tired of is the business became pretty big. And it's like $200 million of revenue. It's a lot of ad sales deals. And I did have some existential, I didn't get into this to sell, that X could sell more insurance, or that X could sell more cars, or I don't really care. And sometimes we would be advertising for things I didn't believe in and didn't like. So I kind of had enough of that side of it. And even I'll give you an example now of I'm not morally opposed to sports betting. In any way it's fine. But I did not want to spend my life basically pushing sports betting on young kids. It was cool, I've made a bunch of money doing sports, and now I'm gonna try to convince a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds to bet on sports. That's not what I wanted to do.
Right.
I don't go do it if you want to. It's just not how I wanted to spend my time.
So what was the process about thinking about the next problem that you want to solve?
Part of it's just exposing myself to different things, reading, talking to people. I invested in 25 companies, something like that. You guys are sponsored by
Outer.
By Outer. I'm an investor in Outer.
Do you want to do our next intro?
Okay. Yeah, no, Outer's a great. I've owned an Outer outdoor couch for years. It's a great
This
product.
is what one would call a native advertisement.
Yeah.
This was not planned. But Jake was a former CEO, was a former guest of ours.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Great guy.
But anyway, it's a great product, and on and on. So I checked a bunch of stuff out through sort of a combination of history, reading about history, learning more about climate, living in the Bay Area where smoke and wildfire season started. I started consuming a bunch of climate content just because I was really curious I wanted to learn about the problem side levers of climate. What are the biggest issues by sector and overall, and then what are the solution sides? And I learned a couple things. One, I thought the whole climate world was way more fascinating than I thought it was going to be. There's so much interesting stuff, mind-blowing things that are being built that could potentially make our future way more awesome. I just got really into it, but then I couldn't help but looking at the space with a Bleacher Report lens on. You mentioned earlier, content packaging is everything.
Right.
And I realized there's absolutely no way that what I wanted doing with the Cool Down, which now we launched last July. We already have over 5 million users a month. But there was no way that you were going to achieve any sort of scale like that, or where I want to be able to take this business with 20, 30, 40, 50 million users a month without packaging that information in ways that were really useful to specific segments of the audience. So it's I use data to build a big sports audience, and now I don't think anybody's really used data well around climate. And so I'm doing the same thing where we're really using data to understand how to help people transition to ultimately, polluting less, and also, making healthier decisions for their families.
Yeah, it seems like a big piece of that is just being in the know, right? And being educated on what's the impact and things like that. But how do you think that media, or I guess media is going to be playing one of the biggest roles in trying to shift human behavior, ultimately because I think I read recycle bins don't really do much for us, or the things that we've tried to do over the years to try to make. Yeah.
I mean, recycling, it turns out, was a concept invented by fossil fuel companies. This
Right.
sounds like conspiracy theory stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not a far left wing person or anything, but it turns out that's true. And yes, 95% of plastic that's put in recycling bins does not get recycled. It's super messed up.
It's just going to end up in like a landfill, no?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
correct. So traditional media, in the sense of you create an article and somebody reads it, and do they magically start living their lives differently? No, I don't think so. But I think that you can get people on a customer journey, and with there are ways to get people on a customer journey. I think with climate is a fairly distinct space where, if you're a generalist news company, people are reading an article and they're leaving. You're a celebrity entertainment site, they're reading about their favorite this gossip, then they're out. What we can do is we can move people down a funnel where we can figure out what if they're interested in wanting to use less plastic, or plastic disturbs them, they sort of go down a thread. If they're interested in environmental justice, they go down a thread. They're a conservationalist, they go down a thread. You can move people into newsletters just the same way we did at Bleacher Report. And then the really cool thing about climate is that products and services are just sort of inherently tied to the content. You start to make different decisions as a consumer once you have this information. So we can educate people, and then we can sort of complete the journey at the bottom of the funnel where they're actually using us to start to take different action. And that's why I think this can be a really innovative company, because it can actually sort of full circle help somebody from the start of their journey where they're using plastic laundry detergent and having a ton of waste that ends up in a landfill, to coming around and buying different products that are sustainable and that are zero waste or close to zero waste. And that can be about little things. It can be about bigger things, like there are going to be millions and millions and millions of households that will need to electrify their homes. People need a lot of help with that. 35% of emissions in the United States come from households. There's no way to solve that unless individual people make some different decisions. So we want to help people with that.
So I'm curious about that, and I know it's a topic that Pat and I talk about, not at length, but we've talked about several times, is power, right? And how you actually can get to a place where you are using electric vehicles or using
Nuclear.
Well, yeah, that's a whole different level. But I mean, we don't have in the state of California, at least, I know for a fact, we don't have enough power to power what we have currently. Nonetheless, like anything else, how do you what are your thoughts on that? And I mean, how does the government really play a role in that? Because that's what is needed to actually power, literally and figuratively, everything that an environmentalist and everybody else who's an advocate of this space is looking to do.
Yeah, I mean, right now in the United States, 90% of new power that's coming online is renewable power, meaning mostly solar and wind. There are ways that people can switch to renewables without having solar panels on their house. A lot of people don't know that, but you can there's a company called Arcadia Climate, that will help you figure out how to get into a community solar program. So you can work with your utility company or somebody who partners with your utility company and turn off gas and oil as your power source, and switch to most likely solar. And there are things out there that people can do that actually make material impacts. That is a really big change that somebody can make.
Yeah.
So the answer is there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of projects going on all around the country, but the United States, if you look at where our sources of power come from, it's a lot of dirty energy compared to other countries, compared to Canada, even, which is much, much cleaner. I mean, the United States, it's a lot of natural gas, which is not natural in any way. That's just clever branding. It's methane. Methane as a warming agent is 80 times more powerful than carbon. Methane ain't good. So it's a lot of natural gas. It's coal is starting to shrink, but it's still a lot of coal. It's a fair amount of oil. So that's just one subset of the problem, but it will become easier and easier for consumers to use energy that is clean and not like I happened to hear Al Gore speak earlier today at a conference, and he referred to basically like oil and gas companies have essentially just used our air and our atmosphere as just a sewage field. And like you start to think about that, and then like, carbon is invisible, so people don't see it, but that is what's been going on. Like we've just been using our air as like sewage. So
when it comes to your approach, what's changed launching a media company today versus when you first launched Bleacher Report? Like what different kind of approaches have you taken, or have you not, or is it kind of similar?
I asked myself that question a lot when we were starting the company, but like it's been a lot of just getting back to fundamentals, which has been kind of fun. Like a lot of it's just rooted in data. It's like figure out one of the big problems in the climate space is that it's a lot of ideological left-wing people who've just, sort of like tried to tell people what to think. And like Americans are pretty individualistic. It's hard to tell them like, hey, you need to do this. Like we're all like, they just don't respond to it well, versus a lot of what we've done is we've tested different messaging for like, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to help you save money. We're going to help you make better health decisions for your families. Like an example of something that's really resonated is it's a little disturbing to some people, but running a gas stove in your house is not super good for health. Like it's pretty much illegal in Australia. It's the equivalent of somebody sitting in the corner of a room smoking cigarettes in your house. A lot of studies have come out that have confirmed that if you run a gas stove and your kid is 12% more likely to develop asthma, like it's not great. But what also happens is a gas stove, it's methane, and it's really bad for the planet. Most people aren't going to switch their gas stove out because it's bad for the planet, but a lot of people are starting to get induction stoves or electric cooktops because they're like, you know what? I don't want to increase the chances of my kid getting asthma, or just like, I don't want, like you have air quality monitors in your house right now. And if you have one of those monitors and you see what happens when your gas stove is on, like it goes high. And so it's like things don't always have to be that dramatic. But oftentimes the way to actually convince people to do things, like the messaging is not so much about like, hey, like be a good citizen of the earth, like, spend a bunch of your hard earned money, even though maybe other people aren't, to, help save the planet. In the United States, that's not super effective. What's more effective is saying, here's why this is good for you.
Yeah.
But if you do that,
here's how it impacts like you directly.
Yeah. But if you do that, you can get the exact same thing done. So a lot of it's what we're doing is just tied to data, figuring stuff like that out.
Well, this was a super fascinating conversation. I think that we could probably sit here and talk for hours about all the things that you are doing, all the things that are to come. But I think we'll save that for maybe another time. But thank you, Dave, for being on the show, for sharing your story and, showing us that, just a different perspective, the kind of rooted in sports, rooted in history, and kind of the basics, and just, keeping at it, staying focused, building, and doing it over and over again. And I know I'm oversimplifying it, but sometimes that's kind of all it takes, is to just put your head, focus on something, do it for a long enough time, do it well, continue growing, and then, move on.
Yeah. Well, it was fun to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.